Good morning, this is Bill.
Hi, Bill, and welcome everyone. We are going to play a quick housekeeping video, and then we will begin the webcast.
Moss Adams is pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize both how you view our presentation and how you interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. For example, you can click the file folder icon to download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by clicking Q&A in the bottom left-hand portion of the icon bar and typing in your question. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. We'll ask polling questions throughout today's presentation. Per the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy Webcast CPE standards, CPE credit will be awarded based on your participation in these polls. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. If you're attending this webcast in a group, in order to receive CPE credit, you must complete our attendance sheet, available in the file folder icon at the bottom of your screen. Please have all group members sign the sheet, and please remit only one sheet per group. Also note, today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and is not available to participants who view the on-demand version. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon to open a PDF file you can save to your computer. We'll email a copy of your PDF certificate in 2 weeks if you can't download it today. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
Good morning, and welcome to today's webcast, Green Solutions for Wine and Agribusiness. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Bill Vyenielo, Senior Business Consultant at Moss Adams. Bill has been working with clients in the wine industry for more than 25 years and has been solving operational challenges for winery clients since 2006. He works with owners and managers to successfully develop and manage their winery operations and build their brands, providing guidance in strategic planning, sales and marketing, and winery and vineyard development. Prior to joining Moss Adams, Bill held executive management positions managing estate winery operations for businesses ranging from startups and turnarounds to highly successful winery businesses. Earlier in his career, he was a lender with a national credit firm, where he was involved with large, complex loans and financing a diverse array of agricultural operations, including dairy, cattle, rice, hay, row, and tree crop operations. Bill, I will now turn the line over to you to get started.
Good morning. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to have a little agenda here that give you a rough profile of the key points we're going to highlight in today's presentation. Part of the focus is really about sustainability, talking a little bit about what it is, and then looking at some of the trends within vineyards and really agribusiness in general. This doesn't have to apply just to vineyards, but if you're a grower, this could be rice, almonds, tree crops, row crops. A lot of these still apply to any type of agricultural endeavor. So we'll look at predominantly vineyards and winery operations, given that I'm based here in Santa Rosa in Sonoma County. So vineyard and agribusiness trends, winery operation trends, and then we'll discuss some of the key takeaways at the end of this. We'll also have time for possibly some question and answer session at the end, where you'll be able to type in questions, and if we have time, we'll answer those. If we don't have time, we'll still follow up with response later on. So we're going to start off with a little questionnaire for everyone here, just to kick off. How do you define green business practices? So if you could go ahead and answer right now. We'd appreciate that.
We'll give everyone a few moments to respond. To participate, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. And we'll go ahead and take a look at the results.
Okay, well, all the above, yes, absolutely. So certainly this covers all the front three: environmental friendly practices, reducing your carbon footprint, environmental stewardship, taking care of the land. All these are obviously spanned by green, sustainable practices. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability and what it really is. In the context of what we're covering today, we're really talking about social responsibility in how a business treats its employees, how it interacts with its community, while being environmentally conscious with its farming practices, and also, obviously, we have to produce profits, so being economically viable is another important part of that three-legged stool around sustainability. So we're thinking about the people, we're thinking about the planet, and we have to think about profitability for a business so that it's ongoing for future generations. So water, obviously a really vital resource with agriculture. And although here in Northern California we've had an improved rainfall, nearly a normal rainfall in normal snowpack this past winter, the carryover effects of the drought in the prior 3+ years are still very real. And they have instilled very keen awareness and understanding of the importance of conserving and managing our precious resource, water. So one of the most active uses of water, obviously, is irrigation when we're farming. So let's start a little bit with looking at irrigation management. What I did is I put together a list of some of the suppliers of technologies that help us decide when to irrigate and how much to irrigate, because that varies throughout the growing season. You'll have a heavy vegetative growth period early on in the vine growing stage. You'll have ripening period for your crop, and so the demands for water use vary tremendously through the growing season. Ranch Systems, the first company that I brought up here, they have soil moisture probes that can feed into a base station and satellite stations within a vineyard or a series of vineyard or vineyard blocks. And this information can be relayed wirelessly to your mobile device. Well, if you're out in the field, it can go into the cloud, so you can access it from wherever you are. It can also feed into the home office. So this will accumulate information every 15 minutes, 24/7. So when you're really trying to decide how much to irrigate, when to irrigate, they have soil moisture monitoring. It also feeds into weather station information that can track temperature, wind speed, evapotranspiration rates, all things that help you decide when to irrigate, and also when to employ other farming practices. TUI technologies, when we start talking about evapotranspiration rates, it's really the evaporation rate from the soils and other surface areas, the transpiration rate of water from plants. The combined effect is what you call and can measure as evapotranspiration rate. And TUI Technologies has in-field system now that can actually measure the evapotranspir rate, not just from a single plant, but from an area, say a 10-acre block in a vineyard, and depending on the site conditions. So that's really a fairly new technology. They're based up in Oregon, but their applications are being used right here in Sonoma and Napa County. Fruition Science, they're based in Napa, and they have, again, the ability to measure evapotranspiration rates from specific vines. You can select reference vines in your vineyard to really monitor what the actual usage is during the day by giving reference plants in your vineyard, and that can help you dial in on when will be the optimal time to irrigate if you're really focused on whether it's to produce the highest yield, whether it's produce the highest quality. Again, these are technology tools that are available to help you dial in and meet your objectives. Smart vineyards, they're another water monitoring, water measuring system. They have to do more with tensiometers, the tension between water in the root zone. So again, it can be an accurate way of measuring what the plant's real demands and requirements are for water. I'll skip the heritage systems. They're based in Napa, and they are really more of a water treatment, water system maintenance, recycling provider of potable water systems and also wastewater treatment systems. They're very, very active in helping wineries reuse water, sometimes up to 8 to 10 times before it has to be disposed of. And then the water risk monetizer, that's a tool that helps an operation figure out what's the value of the water that we're using. So if you know how much water you're using, you can actually put a monetary value to the water use for your operation. So it kind of brings home what is the cost and the value of the water that you're using. And when you start thinking about sustainability, that's an important factor to consider. It can also help you if you're trying to encourage investment in some sustainability types of tools or practices. When you can figure out what the value of the water is that you're using, you can help make your case to the executive team or to an owner or to management, whoever the decision makers are, on making an investment in some technology that can improve your conservation or sustainability practices. I included a graph, a picture of, say, a snapshot of a growing season. So on the bottom of this graph is time. It's the beginning of, say, the growing season in a vineyard. And on the left-hand margin, left-hand axis, we have gallons of water used by the vine per day. And that'll be your top squiggly line in the graph. It's showing how many gallons of water a vine's using a day through the course of the season. So whether it's the bloom period early on in May, or the veraison part where the grapes start to change color in that ripening stage, and then all the way through harvest and what you do after harvest. The heavy, thick line is really showing the rate of application of water from irrigation. And then the dotted line below that is showing the percentage regulated deficit irrigation. And think of it sort of as the percent of the daily water requirements of the plant. It's kind of misleading in calling it regulated deficit irrigation, but it's really the percentage of the daily water requirements that the plant has, how much of that you're supplying to the vine. So in this case, a growing season snapshot, we're thinking of deficit regulated irrigation is really used to try to strike a balance between how much water to apply during the rapid growth phase, the heavy vegetative growth phase of the vine that occurs through bloom up through berry set. And that's a time when you don't want to apply. You typically want to hold back on how much water you apply to the vine. And then after you start getting post-set, you want to start providing more water to the vine so that it's going more into the reproductive or the ripening stage of the plant. And you don't want to stress the plant heavily during that time. So you can apply less water in the spring during the vegetative growth phase, but then try to keep the plant in balance and satisfied so that you don't want to overwater, but you want to give it just enough water so that it's close to its daily needs. So that squiggly line in the first irrigation happened, say, around June 20th. We're providing about, I'd say, 30 to 40% of the plant's needs. But then as we got closer and closer to the grape ripening, the veraison part where the grapes are starting to change color, we're getting close to providing, say, 70 to 80% of the plant's daily needs. So it's under less stress. I've got an infield picture of some of the tools that a toolie station, it looks like a weather station in the vineyard. This is just kind of a snapshot view of on the ground, a couple different locations. One's Napa County Sugarloaf Vineyard. The other one is a famous vineyard in Sonoma County called Gaps Crown. Very, very high quality growing sites where they're using the toolie station to measure the evapotranspiration rate to really, really manage the application of water so that they're using the resource, conserving as much water as possible, but generating the highest quality possible at the same time. And the advantage here, again, is you can really look at acreage, 10 acres at a time, as opposed to just simply seeing what the needs are of a given plant at a time. So let's look at mapping. Some mapping tools now are really coming into play over the last few years, both ground-based and airborne. So with the airborne, really the most applicable and useful airborne technologies today are still provided by airplane-based cameras and also some satellite technology. You can get satellite technology, but your resolution is so much higher when you're using aerial imagery, cameras mounted on aircraft. You can get very high resolution, for example, up to 70 centimeter image pixels, as opposed to satellite imagery where your typical resolution's like 1 kilometer image pixel. So satellite imagery is often free, so it's less expensive, but if you really need more detail, the camera-mounted aerial imagery is much, much better. And then with ground-based technology, we can actually measure some of the characteristics in the soil. I'll talk a little bit later about a soil information system that's put out by Trimble Navigation, and where they actually can map the soil and come up with over 60 different high-resolution maps showing you different soil properties, including the physical properties of the soil, the hydric properties in the soil, even chemistry, chemical makeup, chemical properties in the soil. Oftentimes when we're working with vineyards, we often want to avoid certain types of soil chemistries. For example, magnesium, high levels of magnesium in the soil often will make it a no-go on some specific sites, or they'll dictate what type of rootstock selection you're going to use when you plant that vineyard. So knowing the chemistries, the pH of the soils nowadays will very much drive what type of rootstock you will plant in a given site. With mapping, we also have now technologies that are mobile. So when vineyards are being replanted and you have new sites, often a much greater effort's being expended now in studying the site using, as I said, both ground-based and airborne technologies. But by combining that information from, say, a top-down aerial view and a ground-based information, you collect those technologies. It's really enabling the design of the vineyards to be tailored to the conditions and the characteristics at that specific location. So it really drives the decisions, as I mentioned before, on vineyard block layout, erosion control, optimal ripping depth. So that'll dictate how much water availability in the soil, what soil amendments to apply, and at what rates, even what row direction and what vine spacing and planting densities to use in a given site, along with rootstock and even varietal selections for the location. And it can even help you decide on what type of farming practices to utilize at a given site. Now, when you're farming an existing site, growers are using mobile devices and GPS technology to capture and record information. You can make observations on the fly while you're scouting in the field. That information can be wirelessly uploaded to the cloud, to a database in the office. And from that GPS tagged information, you can generate really accurate maps to visually show the locations, for example, of emerging disease problems, maybe potential pest population hotspots, and even showing vines at certain phenological stages. For example, I know winemakers are using this to track the bricks level on the vineyard blocks to really show and help them map how ripe is this section of vineyard, how ripe is this block, and that will help them plan their harvest planting or harvest decisions, the timing of when they're going to harvest certain blocks. One of the things that I wanted to show is just the visual view of, for example, an NDVI map. It's really showing the difference in vegetative density of a plant. Here, this is a vineyard, but you can use this for any type of farming crop. What you're often trying to achieve when using a map like this is you'll take these pictures at a certain phenological stage year after year, so you can compare differences from year to year in a given block. And your goal oftentimes is to have a very uniform color for each block, and that will help drive efficiencies. It means that the density of the vegetation is similar. It's uniform throughout the block. When you have areas that are not uniform, that often will be a hint that maybe you need to irrigate differently in a certain area. For example, in this picture, we'll have green and blue denoting very dense vegetative canopy, red being very thin or a lower, often people will use the word vigor, but it's really lower density of leaf canopy. And so that may mean that the vines in the red areas are more stressed than others. Vines in the more green or yellow areas are not nearly as stressed. And what you can do if you're taking snapshots at the same time of the year, same phenological stage year to year, you can see if your farming practices and your, for example, your irrigation methodology or maybe your nutrient amendments are helping to create a block that's more uniform in color. I've seen over a period of, say, 3 years, vineyard block go from very extreme wide variances in color to almost the same uniformity across that vineyard block. And so that helps you when your growth is uniform. You can come in and do the same type of work across that block, very efficient to come in and do your leaf pulling, your crop thinning, planning your harvest, to go in and efficiently do what you need to do on that block, as opposed to having to come in and maybe make 3 or 4 different planting or harvest passes when you're trying to pick at the optimal ripeness. The other thing that we're seeing now is these types of mapping images are being developed and available even on a week-to-week basis. So there are, again, companies that are providing these mapping tools. I mentioned earlier the Soil Information System from Trimble Technologies. That's a ground-based system. It's connected to their Connected Farm application, but it's really a soil mapping technology that uses advanced sensors and intelligent targeting and geoprocessing to produce these highly accurate soil maps to give you a really, really good basis to make decisions on how to develop it or how to farm it. Aerial mapping imaging, Greyhawk's based in Napa, as is VineView, their sensing technology. These two compete a bit. One thing about Greyhawk, they've been in this business for many, many years, and they're probably the only company where their equipment is calibrated by the NASA Ames Research Center. So very, very technologically savvy company, very accurate information. Today in the field, some of the things that are often challenging our growers is, for example, the red leaf, leaf roll. You're running into some diseases that people are trying to get their arms around. How is it spread? What is the vector? How do we prevent it from infecting other areas? Red blotch disease, prime example, fairly newly discovered problem over the last few years, but we're finding out that it's very widespread, and they're just starting to learn who the vectors are, which bugs transmit it. So a lot of research and efforts being invested there to try to stem the spread of that disease. Mobile farm management, iCropTrack, probably one of the best farm management softwares and providers out there. You can actually, if you're a vineyard management company, you can provide your information to them. They can help provide reports back to you that are really tailored to each one of your specific clients, each one of your vineyard locations, even down to the vineyard block. So that's fairly new, but very, very useful technology. I mentioned ranch systems on the water monitoring comments earlier, but they have weather stations, they have irrigation controls, they have camera-mounted tools, so they cover a lot of different applications in the field. And again, this is you can access things on the cloud or through your mobile technology to see, is your irrigation system working properly? Are the valves open, closed? Is there a frost emergency? Their technology will notify you if you want to be notified, for example, about frost problems, so that you're prepared in advance and you're out in the field when you need to be. So anyway, the links are provided to these companies where you can find out much more information than I can provide here. Let's move on to sharing information. It's one of the real trends that we're seeing in the past. A lot of times you've had to go to a specific company to access their data to be able to make decisions. And now governments, for example, are starting to provide their databases so that innovative ways of making decisions can be also can help people make decisions in an emergency situation. They can come up with creative ways to work more sustainably. So there's a real movement from closed single source data systems to more open sourcing of information, where pools of information from government agencies, resource agencies can be tapped. For example, here, both Napa County and Sonoma County, they have now given any one of us, any citizens, an open portal to access and even download LIDAR data maps. LIDAR is a light detection and ranging system. It's basically a laser profiling system that produces maps that are showing location and elevation data for specific sites. And you can use it for many, many different land use planning activities. You can use it if you're trying to put together a vineyard development application where you need to go through the permitting process. This mapping information is available to you to have as an adjunct to your application. It shows much greater, much finer detail. And I have an example here, a comparison of how much richer the resolution is from LIDAR data as compared to a standard USGS map that in the past had been kind of the standard. And so we're using this for farming. We're using this to help identify sensitive environmental areas where mitigation work is required, or where we need to protect certain, maybe it's wetlands, maybe it's a forested area. We're providing buffers with our farming activities to maintain a healthy environment and sustain and protect sensitive environmental areas, while using this information also to make better decisions in the design of vineyards, make better decisions in the type of farming activities to undertake in a given area. But to give you an idea of the sense of how this information can be used, the City of Los Angeles is using their LIDAR databases for emergency response for fires, emergency response for police activities, even terrorism activities. So it's helping different emergency response teams to work together in a more coordinated fashion to make really smart decisions. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways we can learn about sustainability and how to get more involved in it. Here in Sonoma County, it's a real prime example. In 2 years ago, January 2014, the Sonoma County wine growers, Sonoma County established a 5-year goal. They wanted to be the first county in the country to have 100% of the vineyards certified as sustainably farmed. And so they put together a program where they can work with the Wine Institute's California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, or LIDAR rules, or another Sustainable in Practice or SIP program. All these provide independent third-party certification for proof that your vineyard is being farmed in a sustainable way. And in Sonoma County, we have almost 60,000 acres of vineyards. And even already within the first 2 years of implementing the program, over 64% of Sonoma County's vineyards have now completed the self-assessment phase of the sustainability practice and checklists that's provided, and almost half, 48% of the county's vineyard acreage is certified by an independent third party as being farmed in a sustainable way. So they provide the workbook, they provide the checklist, and really the scientific measurement system to help any one of us, if we're farming our vineyards, to help track the progress that we're making and eventually being able to attain third-party certification of sustainability. So since the program's inception, over 3,000 online assessment workbooks have already been distributed. Over 100 self-assessment workshops have been held in 24 counties across California. So all the major wine growing regions in California have had these workshops. And today, over almost 1,200 California wineries and vineyards are participating in the program. Just taking a little break here, here's a question for everyone to respond to. When building your sustainable business plan, you'll need to compile your vision, mission, objectives, strategies, and what?
And just as a reminder, if you'd like to earn CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. And we will shut this down in 3, 2, 1, and here are the results.
So action plan, exactly. Everybody, we're on board here. You develop your vision, mission, objectives, and then you lay out your action plan. So let's look at wineries. Again, water conservation is a real high priority when we're talking about sustainability. The drought really reinforced not only the environmental aspect about water, but also just if you don't have the water you need to farm, you're not going to be in business. So how to conserve it? So really, water conservation, the starting point is what's your baseline use? How much water do you use? And really, I'll provide an example here following this, but understanding your baseline starts with doing an audit, looking at what resources of water do you have, how much do you use, and draw from each one of those resources, and how are those water resources being applied, and then you can identify ways to start conserving and reusing it. And then over the span of doing this work, you're going to start looking at how to educate employees across the company and encourage change in behavior. So Jackson Family Wines, really prime leader in this area on sustainability. Looking at water usage, they started off here with a baseline water use, understanding what your sources are, your uses are, and I talked a little bit earlier about what is the value of the water that you're using. So they actually assign a cost per gallon for use. And then they'll start looking at how do we enact conservation measures? What are the easiest things to tackle? How do you implement reuse technologies? And then again, how do you encourage behavioral change and communicate your goals and incentivize people to drive those changes and implement them? So water audit, some examples of some of the tools that are available. Here's a comprehensive guide that's available through the Wine Institute on sustainable management of winery water and also the associated energy use and drawing that water, using that water, recycling that water. Along with that will come forms where you're actually inventorying, again, what resources do you have, how's that water being used, and helping identify ways to trim that use. When you're trying to identify what your use is, one of the great tools is installing flow meters at key locations in the different process areas, say a winery production facility. You're looking at your intake point, even at your wellheads. You can provide flow meters that you're going to check periodically. You're going to look at those high-use areas like a barrel room where you're washing barrels, your stainless cellar where you have tanks and you're washing those, keeping those sanitized. Cooling towers. We have to control our environment in the winery, so whether we want to warm things up, cool things down, change humidity levels, cooling towers and an air conditioning system, those all come into play. There's a lot of water extracted from the environment. A lot of it is warm. What do you do with that water? Can you use that water, for example, in a heat exchange system where that warm water coming off the cooling towers might go into the boiler room, so you already have water that's warmed up. Doesn't take nearly as much energy to heat to a boiling point or to 180-degree temperature for sanitization. You're saving a lot of energy there by finding smart ways to use water that's been warmed up in another process and using it in another area of the winery. Landscape irrigation. Again, how much water do you use to maintain the landscape? A lot of wineries are using less and less because they're moving to more xerophytic types of landscaping, but they're also working with municipalities to use recycled water rather than groundwater or potable water. And then you're looking at discharge points. So what's coming in, what's going out, the ability to use flow meters to measure that really gives you a very accurate overall picture of what you're using. And obviously a point here is make sure you calibrate those flow meters. And here's PG&E, one of our local resource providers of energy and even water. It is very, very active in helping to provide classrooms, websites, and links to educate all of us on how to use our water and energy resources most efficiently. Here's some examples that Jackson Family Farms came up with that are low-tech solutions, some that maybe require a little higher capital investment, but using squeegees to reduce water use in the winery. So for cleaning the floor, removing water rather than hosing things down. High-pressure hose nozzles as opposed to lower-pressure nozzles, you're going to use much less water, but more effective cleaning capabilities. Don't rinse after the PAA wash, so during your sanitization, your dip in citric and PAA and rinsing typically with water after that. You can oftentimes skip the rinse after the dip in the PAA solution. I talked a little bit about cooling tower cycles, increasing your cooling tower cycles concentration and optimizing your HVAC settings, so your heating and your cooling settings. Try to optimize those so you're not wasting energy and running them at the wrong time of the day. Capital investments like pig systems for pushing wine. Those are kind of, think of it as a soft ball that can fit inside of a hose that you're typically transferring wine through. Oftentimes in the past, water was used to push the last remnants of wine from one vessel to another. Now with the pig system, you can put the pig in place and water behind it to push. So it's sort of the interface between the wine and the water. So you're not diluting some of the wine. You're able to push the wine fully through a hose without diluting any of it. So you're not losing some of that wine at the end of the phase of the movement of the wine, and you're using less water. Using roll-up doors at the warehouse, that again it's a fast way to open and close the door, prevent hot air from coming in during the peak of summer, and still allow activities to move on quickly. At Jackson Family Wines, they looked into, with Thomas Beard Company, they looked into their barrel washing process, and they were actually able to reduce their water use to 1/3 of what it used to be, because they're now able to reuse that water. The first rinse cycle water that goes through the barrel, they're able to use it again and again as you progressively move through a series of barrels to be washed. So tremendous savings in water through working with another company, Thomas Beard in Napa. Another way that's capturing water, used extensively in Australia, but where they're obviously had much more severe drought conditions, sometimes spanning, rather than 3 or 4 years, up to a decade. They're using rainwater capture technology, and that's being transferred now to our local industries. And Jackson Family Wines is capturing rainwater on some of their winery facilities and even some new facilities that they're building. They're designing those in the planning stages to capture water so that it can be reused for their landscape and other uses. So here's a kind of a cumulative look at what they did to look at what activities could they start trimming their water use and what's the cumulative savings across each one of these activities as they're able to reduce their barrel washing hot water use, their wine pushing efficiency, their increasing cooling tower cycles of concentration, reusing post-rinse sanitation. So you can see the different activities. So if you have an operation and you're going through a water audit, you may be able to identify the low-hanging fruit, the areas that are using the water the most, the areas that can possibly save the most water or reuse the most water most efficiently. So there's a snapshot on one winery's approach to seeing what improvements could they make over time and which would be their top priority with the greatest payback. So another question. How often should you review your water and energy consumption? Should it be monthly, annually, quarterly? You're not sure.
And just another reminder for those of you that would like a copy of today's slide deck, you can download them from the folder that says slide deck and handouts at the bottom of your screen. We will also send the slides via email after the webcast. And I'll give you a few more moments to respond. And let's take a look at the results.
So monthly, highest choice, quarterly is second. Good responses. I think that initially looking at these usages monthly is a great way for a team to get a really good handle, an immediate handle on their water, their energy use. Over time, what people are learning is that looking at this every quarter, routinely on a quarterly basis, is kind of the way that companies evolve toward. So we might be able to identify the areas that will probably provide the greatest benefit in terms of water conservation, energy conservation. But this is sort of where the rubber meets the road is, can you get the staff to really employ the changes that maybe a team, a task force has put together this plan. Now it's really execution and getting things to become part of the way you run your business on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. So getting people involved, creating quarterly reports that can be distributed amongst the different functional areas in the team, so that people can see, here's our baseline, what improvements are we making, and what can I do within my area of responsibility to help improve and work toward becoming more efficient. We're providing more sustainable business and being more profitable, more efficient with what we do, also being more environmentally conscious about our business activities. So identifying your water, your energy uses, creating KPIs, key performance indicators. In this case, Jackson Family used tons crushed and barrels. How many barrels are they maintaining as sort of the KPIs to monitor their water usage or energy use, like how many gallons per barrel or how many gallons per ton crushed of water are used and are needed. And then it's important to think about how to incentivize, set goals for across the company so that people really buy in and really get actively engaged with applying these conservation measures. Moving into energy, it's sort of the same trend of thought. You're starting with an energy audit to understand the company's actual baseline energy use. Some helpful tools are available from PG&E's library, and I've provided a link here to check out your Insider's Guide to Financing Energy Efficiency Projects. PG&E is very, very helpful. They'll actually send a team out to audit your site if you request it, and they can give you sort of a starting point on these are the areas where you can make some immediate improvements. These are areas where you're doing a really good job. So identifying and implementing energy conservation measures, including the use of renewable energy such as wind and solar power. Those are very, very, there's a lot of interest in those areas right now, and some wineries are even working with companies like Tesla to improve battery technologies where you can bank and store energy derived from solar power so you can use it later on. That's one of the shortfalls that we've been running into is really the ability to store power that you've generated from solar energy. How do you maintain it and use it at a later time? It's hard to bank it, and there's a lot of investment being made right now on how to bank that energy for a later use. The other thing is a move toward widely distributed systems, such as think of rooftop solar panels, and businesses are moving away from more of a centralized power plant to more of a distributed system, which can make systems a lot safer and more resilient to threats such as economic swings or impacts from Mother Nature. You have a more dispersed energy network. Maybe one area gets hit by a storm or a tornado or some other hail. Maybe you have some section of your system goes down, but other areas of your system are still up and going, and so you're less vulnerable to threats when you have a more widely dispersed system. So another last question here. Do you plan to implement sustainable business practices in the next 12 months? I want to see what our audience thinks.
All right, and once you have completed all your CPE requirements, you will be able to download a PDF of your CPE certificate from the certification icon at the bottom of your screen. And this is our last polling question for today. And let's see the results.
So we're 50% yes, and 50% unsure. So it sounds like a lot of people are interested in it, not sure how to implement it. So I'm hoping that some of these links that I provided earlier on will give you sort of the educational tools to dive in and learn more about how you can get started implementing sustainable business practices. We hear a lot about big data nowadays with the internet, mobile technology, all these new applications that are coming out that we're learning how to use. Well, here's a local app company that I've been learning about, and actually we're going to be putting on a industry roundtable in a couple weeks. A company called Enolytics, and it's a startup company, a young team, but one of the founders has been working in the healthcare field for the last 25 years and really is adept at massaging and interpreting collections of data from multiple databases. And with the newer big data analytics technologies, he's able to really pull out key trends and identify key trends. So in the way that it's being applied by Enolytics to our wine industry, I'm providing an example where they actually measured actual consumer behavior by partnering with an app called Hello Vino. And Hello Vino has just over 2 million consumers that they want to go and look for preferences. What wine should I select with this meal? Or I like this style of wine. What would you recommend? Should I have a Chardonnay? Should I have a Cabernet? Well, the 2.1 million customers for Hello Vino, all the activity, all the use that they have had in using the application, they tapped into that with partnering with Enolytics database processing capabilities, and they were looking at one thing: how does the wine consumer behavior change over time during the day? And there's a link here if you want to check out the results. But what they found was that what they called the wino clock. They found that across the U.S. that from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., it's really the peak time for when people are interested in wine, when they're actively looking for recommendations or food pairing advice. And the real peak was right around the 6 p.m. hour, really being the most active every day, except for Sundays when the peak usage was an hour earlier at 5 p.m. And they broke this data down into major metropolitan areas like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, and they found there were even differences within metropolitan areas. And for some reason, San Francisco was about an hour earlier than some of these other metropolitan areas like Los Angeles and New York. So from a marketing perspective, companies, if they can tap into the big data analytics, use these tools to find out more about their customer and understand their actual behavior, understand their needs, their preferences, you can be very, very focused on how you use your own company's resources to help improve your sales, to help improve your relationship with your customers, choose when is the best time to communicate with your customers, what type of information should you share with your customers, and what types of questions do you want to be asking your customers. So, big trend. Another big trend is supply chain transparency. It's becoming more and more obvious throughout the entire supply chain, say from the grower all the way to the grocery market and all the steps in between, what companies are doing to enable them to trace the movement of the product, to trace the movement of the supplies that are used, say, in manufacturing a product. And it's just much more transparent along this whole chain of what are the inputs, what are the outputs, what are the healthy aspects of it, what are things that are possibly not healthy. Consumers are very in tune with what are the things am I putting into my body. We're obviously very keen on understanding that when we're thinking about providing a safe work environment for our workers, whether it's in the vineyard. What chemicals are we using? How do we minimize the use of chemicals? How do we employ more sustainable practices? How do we use possibly more organic type of methods? So supply chain transparency is becoming more and more an important tool that's used by big suppliers or big providers of products. I know that I've worked with Whole Foods before, where they're very much into understanding the path that your grapes took, what farming practices were employed in growing the grapes, what winemaking practices were used in making the wine. They want to provide transparency so that when they're putting a product on the shelf, they can educate consumers about how healthy is this product, what type of sustainable or stewardship type of activities is the grower of this product providing. So they're providing a healthy product. They want to educate people about companies that are doing things that are healthy for the environment. So again, consumers are really supporting more and more companies that are doing things that are stewarding the land, preserving things for future generations. So just kind of a recap here. I think some of the key takeaways, we've talked a lot about sustainability. Really wanted just to reinforce it. Businesses taking responsibility for people, the planet, and the profits. It's a three-legged stool when we talk about sustainability, and it's really now gone mainstream. It is at the core of business planning. It's at the core of how people are running their businesses today, and it's just going to become more and more ingrained with what we're doing going forward. Technologies that we're all learning about, and technologies are constantly emerging and changing. We're all looking for ways to use these tools to help ourselves, help people, help businesses operate in a more informed, a mindful, sustainable way. So whether that's using the mapping technologies, the big data analytics that are out there, the open source sharing of data, these are all different ways that the internet, mobile technologies are helping us tap the tools and use the tools to create a more sustainable business environment and healthy environment for not just for us today, but for future generations. So we've got a little bit of time possibly for some questions.
And as a reminder, if you'd like to submit a question today, you can enter that into the Q&A window on your console. And I'll give it a minute to see if we have any questions. And it looks like your presentation was pretty thorough, Bill. I think you hit on all the important topics. Thank you again for a great presentation. And as a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you must complete the group attendance sheet in order to receive credit. You can download this attendance sheet in the Slides and Resources icon at the bottom of your screen. If you participated as an individual and met all certification requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE icon at the bottom of your screen. Open the icon and click the printer in the lower right corner to download a PDF copy. I'll keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download the certificate now. And a copy will be emailed within 2 weeks should you have any difficulties. And here is a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you'll join us next time.
Thank you, everybody, for your time, and please feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions.